Red Dead Redemption 2 shows us the end of an era, as the golden age of Wild West and outlaws is coming to an end. With the era being dominated by gunslinging cowboys, I wanted to see how much of Red Dead Redemption 2 that I could beat using only my fist. So the rules that I made for this challenge are: in combat I can only use my fist, and if I am stuck on a mission I can use melee weapons like knives or machetes, but I will mainly just be using my fist in combat. And if Arthur randomly decides to pull out a gun and won't put it away, I can use the gun as a melee weapon, but if I hit or kill an enemy with a bullet, I will have to restart the mission. And I cannot use the lasso in combat to kill people by pulling them off of an elevated surface like a cliff or a building, or by hog-tying them and killing them. But I can use the lasso if I have to pull somebody off of a horse or hog-tie them and then arrest them. I just cannot use the lasso to directly kill anybody. Now with the rules out of the way, let's jump right into Chapter 1. Starting off in Chapter 1, we find a ranch that has been taken over by the O'Driscolls, and after relearning the controls in a pretty close call, we loot the house, steal a horse, and take Sadie back to the gang's camp. In the second mission, Javier and Arthur go searching for John. One mountain climb later, we find John and get attacked by a pack of wolves. I just ran circles around the wolves until Javier got John safely onto his horse. Unfortunately for Arthur, I ran out of stamina and could not get on my horse and was killed by the wolf. On my second attempt, I did have to fight off the wolves a little bit, but they also helped me by one of them just flinging itself off the mountain, and the horse actually let me on, and we were able to save John and get back to camp safely. The third mission of the game, The Aftermath of Genesis, is just supposed to be a simple hunting mission where Arthur and Charles go and hunt some deer for the gang. But since I can only use my fist to kill the deer, this mission was 20 minutes of me chasing after the deers like a moron just to get one hit on them. One of the places that the deer stop and give me an opportunity to kill them is on the river, and when I was finally able to kill the first deer, its body got swept away by the river, and after I killed the second deer, I went back to the first deer, and the deer's body was out of bounds, and I failed the mission. But luckily, I reached a checkpoint and it fixed the mission, and I was able to ride back with Charles and complete the mission. When I did the Throwables Only challenge, the mission Old Friends was the first stopping point of the run, but for some reason I felt like it was easier to do with only my fist. This doesn't mean it was easy, but the mission only took about 20 minutes, and I think in the Throwables Only challenge it took me like an hour or two to beat. I might have just gotten very lucky. After we kill the O'Driscolls, we chase down Kieran, kidnap him, and take him back to the gang. Who the Hell is Leviticus Cornwall is the first train robbery mission of the game, and the last major mission in Chapter 1, so I assumed that I would be able to quickly beat the mission just like the other Chapter 1 missions, but I do not think I could have been any more wrong about this mission, as it halted my progress and would be where I would spend the next 4 hours of my time trying to beat this one mission. And you might be asking what made this mission so difficult. Well, it was because Lenny was the only one that could shoot the enemies, and that there were a lot of them, so I needed Lenny to kill some of the guards that were farther away, and so I did not die while I was approaching the guards, since I have no range and have to get right into their face to kill them. The first part of the mission wasn't that bad, where Lenny and I have to move through the train and kill a couple of guards. Lenny did die a few times, but that is incomparable to the second part of this mission, where we jump off the train and have to fight all of the guards, while sitting behind tiny rocks that provide no cover, and for the fact that Lenny follows you. So instead of sitting in cover and sniping at the guards from a distance, Lenny would charge right into the open with me and die. Another annoying part of this mission was that the guy standing on top of the train cars, as Lenny would kill them instantly and they would not be a problem, and other times they would kill both of us. I got decently far in the first couple of runs. I made it to the final train car a couple of times where the last group of enemies were, but it always ended the same way, with Lenny just dying right in front of me. So nearing 5 hours of attempts on this one mission, I decided to just skip the mission, deem it impossible, and continue on with the game. But I said that I would go back and attempt the mission after I beat the game to see if it really was impossible. And after loading up Mission Replay, playing through this mission again, I somehow beat it on my first try. I do not know how I spent 5 hours on that one mission just to try like a week later and be able to beat it in 5 minutes. But I am happy that this mission was possible, and that means that every mission in Chapter 1 is possible to beat using only your fist. After the successful train robbery, the gang packs up and moves out of the snowy mountains of Ambarno, and moves down to Horseshoe Overlook just south of the small little town of Valentine. Chapter 2 is off to a great start as the mission's eastward bound, polite society Valentine style, paying a social call, which I was scared about, but it ended up being very easy and I was able to beat it on my first attempt. Exit pursued by a bruised ego, which was possible, I just had to stab the bear a few times and it ran away. Money lending and other sins 1, Who is not without sin, and the Spines of America were all very easy. But then I had to do the mission, The First Shall Be the Last. It did not start off too difficult, as all I had to do was take out some bounty hunters with Javier and Charles to save Sean, but there were some guys that were standing on cliffs shooting at Javier and I. I had to rely on Javier to take them out since I couldn't reach them, so I just had to sit there and hope that Javier could kill them so we could continue the mission. Unfortunately, Javier only uses a revolver, so he had a shorter range, and it also seemed like the last enemy that we needed to kill to progress was invincible, as Javier kept on shooting him and the guy just had all the bullet wounds over his body, proving that he was getting hit, but he was resilient and wasn't taking any damage, so I got out my binoculars and watched the guy get shot for 10 minutes, and then decided that the mission would be impossible since he was just invincible. And if I used the lasso to pull him down, it would kill him, and I would have to restart the mission. I even retried the mission just like with the first train robbery, but the same thing happened as the man just was invincible and not taking any damage. It sucks that this mission is impossible because the second part of this mission where we actually rescue Sean was very easy and I was able to complete it on my first try. So as you probably expected, it is not possible to beat Red Dead Redemption 2 using only your fist. I was able to make it a decent way through Chapter 2, and I was able to beat all of Chapter 1 with only my fist, so let's see how many more missions you can complete with only your fist. A Quiet Time is the most chaotic mission in the game, besides that it was a very easy one. Lester the Meek was an interesting one, as Micah died a few times, but the mission has some very generous checkpoints that made it very easy. However, the second part of this mission, where Arthur and Micah have to escape the cops, was stupidly difficult because I had to rely on Micah to kill the cops, and either he would die or my horse would die. And I kept failing the mission when I reached the telegram pole, so I was about ready to give up and just call it quits on the mission. But I finally got past the pole and the enemies despawned. I thought I had finally beat the mission. I was wrong, as the mission just decided to break, and Micah just decided to park himself in the middle of the road. So I left him and failed the mission. A few attempts later, I was able to complete the mission. Luckily, it did not break on me this time. A Fisher of Men? All we had to do was go fishing with Jack. Pouring Forth Oil 4 is the second train robbery of the game, and I am still scarred from the first one. Unlike the first one though, this one is actually impossible because Sean cannot handle taking down one enemy, as the dude that is on top of the train car instantly kills Sean, and there's nothing that you can do about it. Even if you are fast enough to kill the guys in the train car and somehow get on top of the train car before Sean gets a paper cut and dies, the next part of the mission is also impossible. When the cops arrive and the gang has to fight their way off the train, I swear that they have reduced health because John and Sean were both dying from like 2 shots, and I was not able to make any progress in the mission because they were dying so quickly, so I just skipped that section, escaped, and finished the mission. Next, I tackled an American pastoral scene, which was another impossible mission, where we have to stop and steal a stagecoach and kill all of the guards. And for some reason, Micah just doesn't kill any of the guards, so it is up to me to stop the stagecoach and kill every one of the guards with only my fist. The only way that I could stop the stagecoach was to jump onto it and pull out the driver, and watch Arthur dive face first onto the ground and run around panicked like a headless chicken as I tried to kill all of the guards, as Micah does absolutely nothing. And I tried my hardest, but for some reason I could not pull the guards off of their horses, so they just shot me. I tried for about half an hour, but after getting nowhere, I just decided to give up and skip this section and get to the second part of the mission, which I also could not beat. The second part of this mission has the O'Driscolls setting up an ambush, and I was able to get decently far into what I think was the last couple of enemies. I only got there about once or twice, but I kept getting one shot and sent right back to the beginning of this section again. So after repeatedly getting one shot, and since the first part of this mission was impossible anyway, I just decided to skip it and continue on with the game. With the sheep and the goats, that makes it 3 impossible missions in a row. The first part of this mission was easy, as we buy a rifle, scare off and steal some rancher sheep, and herd them back to Valentine. But the second part of this mission is also where I failed in the Throwables only run, because it is an instance of where the game forces you into Deadeye and makes you kill the guys that are holding John and Strauss hostage. The third part of this mission was also impossible, just like in Pouring Forth Oil 4. I feel like John, Dutch, and Strauss had less health than they usually do, just because of how insanely quick they were dying. Also, there were too many enemies to take out. When we were fighting our way through the town to protect Strauss, there were guys on the balconies and roofs of the building that I just could not reach, so I had to skip it and finish the mission. The final mission of Chapter 2, A Strange Kindness, was a breath of fresh air, as it was a mission that was actually possible. As Arthur and Charles go looking for a new place to set up camp, they find a beautiful spot at Clemens Point, We have to help a man that was kidnapped, kill his attackers, and return the man to his family. Chapter 2 had its fair share of possible and impossible missions. Let's just hope that Chapter 3 is more like Chapter 1 and we can complete every mission, or not fail as many as we did in Chapter 2. The first mission of Chapter 3, The New South, was made for this challenge as you are not allowed to use weapons and have to knock out the criminals and return them to jail. The course of True Love 2 and 3 were two fast and easy missions. The mission, An Honest Mistake, started off nice and easy as we robbed a stagecoach and had to escape our pursuers, and the gang chooses to hide out in a random barn. But that is when everything fell apart as we are locked in the barn and have to fight from the inside of this barn that has no cover. Charles and Bill were taking too much damage and were dying very quickly, and I could not run far enough to even reach some of the enemies, so this was another skip. I also had a little bit of trouble with the final part of this mission because pulling someone off of their horse is unnecessarily hard and seemed to only work like 50% of the time. After a while though, I was able to complete the final section. But the mission was still ultimately impossible because of that stupid barn section. Further Questions of Female Suffrage was a rare possible mission where the only complication was fighting a few Lemoyne Raiders. Preaching Forgiveness as He Went was another disappointing mission as it started off well and I was getting pretty far into the first part, but Lenny kept dying and I could not kill the enemies fast enough to protect Lenny or myself, and even if I was able to take out all of the enemies, I would not be able to take out the guy on the balcony who uses the Maxim gun. American Distillation was a kind of fun mission as it was possible and I did not have to worry about protecting the AI. Advertising the New American Art was impossible because Hosea is driving the carriage and there are way too many enemies to just ignore them, and Hosea dies almost instantly. Also, the first part is impossible as when I get near Hosea, the guy just throws him off the balcony and kills him. After one of my least favorite missions, mainly because of these challenges that I've done with Red Dead, we now have Sodom Back to Gomorrah, which is a bank robbery mission, and actually the first one in the game because there are only 2 in the entire game. And I was not confident in this being possible going into it, but somehow it actually was. Now I'm not saying it was a breeze because for some reason, the first couple of attempts I could not hit the policeman and just died, but a couple of attempts later, the game just allowed me to hit him. I don't know if it was bugged or the game just bugged and let me hit him, I'm not really sure. I was able to make it pretty far until I hit a small roadblock because there were enemies behind a fence and Karen would just refuse to get on her horse, and they would just take too much damage and die. But after about 5 minutes later, everyone finally decided that they would actually get on their horse, and I was able to reach the checkpoint, and then we were able to just escape the cops without any trouble and finish the mission. The Fine Joys of Tobacco was like almost every other mission, as it started off very promising, but then I ran into a hurdle as the AI is just taking way too much damage, and we are not able to kill the enemies fast enough before Sean dies. So sadly, this is yet another skip. Magicians for Sport is another rare possible mission, and the only thing really of note is that this is the only place in the entire game where you can get the rare rolling block rifle. Horseflesh for Dinner was disappointing as I was only able to make it about 2 minutes into the mission before failing after we stole the horses, as John and Javier would die in the same spot every single time, and I could not make any progress on the mission. Friends in Very Low Places and Blessed Are the Peacemakers were back-to-back extremely easy missions. Unfortunately though, I was not lucky enough to have 3 possible missions in a row, as the next mission was a short walk in a pretty town, where the Greys set up an ambush in Rhodes and killed Sean. Then Arthur and Micah have to fight their way out of the town, and this part might have been doable as I was able to hit a checkpoint, but once again, I just think there were too many enemies for me to take out. Micah kept dying, and also not really killing any of the enemies. And of course there were some guys on the roofs and balconies that I just could not reach at all. And the final part of the mission where Bill is held hostage and we have to kill the cops to save him is an instant fail because it is another forced Deadeye moment, so even if the second part of this mission was possible, we would have just failed here. The worst part about doing this challenge is that one of my favorite missions in the entire game, Blood Feuds Ancient and Modern, is impossible, and I had to skip most of it, as in the second section, John would die almost instantly, and you were forced to kill them from the balcony. You cannot re-enter the house and go back down the stairs and go out the front door to kill them. Trust me, I tried a lot. Then there's the forced Deadeye moment after kicking down the door, where you have to kill the guys behind the door. Chapter 3 does end on a high note as the Battle of Shady Belle is a quick and easy mission. As the gang finds their new home at Shady Belle, they now get ready to explore the bustling, industrialized city of Saint Denis. Chapter 4 is off to an amazing start as the Joys of Civilization. Angelo Bronte, a man of honor, no, no, and thrice no, and the Gilded Cage were all possible. We had a good run of 4 straight possible missions, and I knew that it would not last forever, as a fine night of debauchery broke the streak. Heading into the mission, I knew it probably was not going to be possible because it takes away your satchel and most of your weapons, so I could not have any health cures or miracle tonics to help me get past the hordes of enemies that this mission has. Also, with the allies taking too much damage and dying, and the lack of checkpoints in this mission. I tried to skip this section by jumping into the water to see if I could trigger the end of the mission cutscene, but when I jumped into the water, I would just abandon the gang. And when you get to the safe, you are forced into Deadeye and have to kill the guard, so the mission is over before it even gets a chance to start. In the mission Horsemen Apocalypses, the Lemoyne Raiders killed Kieran and launched an attack on the gang at Shady Belle. Surprisingly, this was another possible mission. The most difficult part of this mission was actually getting outside of the house, because it just would not let me jump through the window, so I had to shoot out the window, allowed me to jump outside the building and help kill the rest of the Lemoyne Raiders. I thought that this mission would take a decent amount of time, but I was actually able to beat it on my first try. Back to failing missions, every part of Urban Pleasures was impossible, like the section on the tram where we are forced to use a revolver and all we can do is sit there and watch Dutch die. The second part where we have to fight through the streets of Saint Denis, I was able to make it decently far, but I could not pull the cops off their horses or kill the cops that were up on the balconies. The final part of this mission is where we have to escape Saint Denis with Dutch getting jumped on by a cop and Lenny constantly dying. I could not even make it 30 seconds into this last section, so this is the first mission where every part of the mission is actually impossible. It's kinda crazy it took us 4 chapters to reach a mission like this. Country Pursuits was impossible, as when the alligator attacks you, you have to shoot it for it to go away, and if you do not do that, this will happen to you. American Fathers 2 was easy. After the oil rig explodes, you can just ignore all of the guards and run straight to Eagle Flies, and let him kill all of the guards that are chasing after you. Revenge is a dish best eaten was a painful one, as the mission was going so well until we ran into our greatest enemy, a balcony. I sat there for like 10 or 15 minutes just pacing back and forth, seeing if John or Dutch, or hell anyone could actually hit them on the balcony, but they just couldn't, so I just decided to skip past this part. And it sucks that I had to skip this because every other part of the mission was possible. And I was even able to skip the part where you have to kill all of the guards after kidnapping Bronte, as all I had to do was run straight for the docks and I was able to enter a cutscene, which makes the fact that this mission is impossible even more devastating. The final mission in Chapter 4, Banking the Old American Art, is where all hell breaks loose for the gang as they try to rob the Bank of Saint Denis that results in the death of Hosea and Lenny. I bet you can guess why this mission was impossible. There are 2 reasons, and they have been prevalent throughout the entire run. Enemies on the balcony that were too far away for me to hit, and I had no one else from the gang supporting me, so I would just die or one of them would die. And when Lenny is killed, it forces you into Deadeye, and you have to kill the guys who killed Lenny, because there is like an invisible wall that will not go away until they are killed. Because it starts a little cutscene where Arthur runs up to Lenny. Trying to escape Saint Denis, what is left of the gang that robbed the bank sneaks aboard a ship, but unfortunately for them, they run into a nasty storm that leads to them being shipwrecked on the island of Guarma. The gang's vacation to Guarma gets off to a great start as they are arrested and quickly freed by some rebels, and have to help them fight off the soldiers. Welcome to the New World is the first mission in Chapter 5, and it was not too difficult, it just took a few tries to beat. Savagery Unleashed is impossible because of the guy that is standing on the roof of one of the buildings, and there is no way I can reach him or even get close to him because the mission area is so small, and even if you go like 10 feet away, you will just abandon the mission. A kind and benevolent despot was only hard because of the final part of the mission where Arthur stays back and fights off the soldiers. Fighting them on the hill was a little annoying as they would just slide down the hill and I would have to chase after them, opening up to me being shot by the guys who were standing up on the rocks on the higher ledges. It was possible, it just took a few attempts to beat. Hell Hath No Fury, another really fun mission that was not possible due to there being too many enemies to take out and Dutch constantly dying. This was another mission where I had to skip every part of it, as in the first part, the allies kept dying, too many enemies to take out. In the second part, Dutch and Hercule would always die at the same corner, like I just physically could not get past that corner, because they would die to the guys sitting behind it every single attempt. And in the final part of the mission, I would count as impossible as I have to fire the cannon to hit the battleship, and we sink it, presumably killing some of the people on board. And like I said in the rules earlier, if I hit someone with a bullet or use it to kill them and it fails, so I count that as impossible. Paradise Mercifully Departed was a weird one, as I did not know how I was going to beat it because there were enemies that were in the watchtowers that I obviously could not reach. But to my surprise, I could just run past the enemies and just straight up ignore them, and I was able to actually hit the checkpoint. Next, I had to survive a wave of enemies, which went better than expected. For the final part of this mission, I slowly took out all of the enemies, and I had to use a cannon to kill the dictator. And I chose to call this mission impossible because we used the cannon to directly kill the dictator by shooting the cannon and forcing the building to collapse on him. I'm going to add a few missions to the Chapter 5 section here because they take place back on the map, but Chapter 6 hasn't officially started yet, and if you look in like the mission select or mission replay or whatever, the game counts these missions as Chapter 5, so I'm just going to tack them on to the end right here. Dear Uncle Tactus was a nice and easy mission where we find out that the gang left Shady Belle and are now living in some shacks in the swamp. Fleeting Joy starts right after reaching the gang's new camp as the Pinkertons launch a raid and Sadie and Arthur have to do everything themselves. The mission starts by forcing you into Deadeye to kill the guy using the Maxim gun. Luckily, it does allow you to cancel the Deadeye, and you are also able to tackle the guy that is using the Maxim gun, so I had to start off every attempt by tackling him and leaving myself out in the open for everyone to shoot me. I spent 40 minutes attempting this mission and got decently far into the mission, but I could not reach a checkpoint, so that means that every time I died, or Sadie or Bill ended up dying, that I had to start it all over again. Sadie kept dying in the same spot every time, so I just decided to deem it impossible, since I had to restart the mission from the beginning every time I failed and I was not gaining any progress at all. A Fork in the Road is the mission where Arthur is diagnosed with tuberculosis. All we have to do is get him to the doctor. In Icarus and Friends, we get to fly a hot air balloon. Do you even fly it because you really just let the wind take you? Whatever, I'm just gonna say fly. This mission was impossible in two different sections, where Sadie is getting chased by the O'Driscolls and we have to protect her, but since I am 200 feet in the air, I cannot do anything to help her. And in the final section, where there are too many enemies to kill before Sadie would die, and I had an unexpected enemy is when I pulled one of the O'Driscolls off of their horses, the horse decided to fight back and one of the horses even killed me. That's Murphy Country is the final mission, technically, of Chapter 5, where Arthur and Charles are sent to look for a new spot for the gang to set up camp, and they pick a cave that is home to a gang of cannibalistic murderers. Great choice. This was luckily doable, and the gang has found their new home for the final time. Is that even proper English? I don't think it is. Visiting Hours is the first official mission of Chapter 6, where Sadie and Arthur have to break John out of jail. This was another mission where all of the parts were impossible, as we were forced into a sniper rifle and have to kill the guards, and you cannot even get close to them because you will abandon Sadie. Next, you have to escape the prison with all of the guards shooting at you, and there are no checkpoints when you are running back to the boat. When you finally get on the boat, Sadie, John, or Arthur will just die instantly. Just a Social Call is just like Visiting Hours, as all of these sections are impossible. Like in the first part where Dutch kills Cornwall, he will stub his toe and then die. In the second section, there are way too many enemies that are just way too spread out, and Micah and Dutch do not do anything and will just die. And in the final section, while escaping, the same thing will happen. Micah and Dutch won't fire back or do anything, and then one of you will just die to the guards. A Rage Unleashed is the first possible mission of Chapter 6, as the gang helps Eagle Flies steal back some horses that the army stole from them. The Delights of Van Horn brings us back to failing missions, as both parts of the mission are impossible. The first part because Bill dies in like 10 seconds, and the second part where we are riding in a carriage full of dynamite, the enemies can shoot the dynamite and just blow us up. Archaeology for Beginners, The Bridge to Nowhere, Honor Amongst Thieves were all easy and possible missions. The Fine Art of Conservation was not possible because there were too many enemies to kill, and there was a stagecoach full of soldiers that when they arrived, Charles was always killed. Goodbye Dear Friends locks you into using a sniper rifle to protect Sadie and Dutch. No matter how hard you try, you cannot exit the sniper rifle. Favored Sons was probably the worst mission to try and beat with only your fist, as there were 3 outcomes. Either Dutch or Eagle Flies would die immediately, you would die immediately, or you would get decently far and then one of the allies would die, so you would have to restart from the beginning. I got so frustrated with this mission because of Dutch dying so quickly that I tried to get to the soldiers faster by flinging Arthur off of the rock just so I could get to the soldiers a little bit quicker, and tried to have them shoot me instead of Dutch, so hopefully he would survive a little bit longer. That did not work, but if you do use a health cure, you can actually survive the fall and run down there and kill a few of the guards a little bit faster, but you will ultimately fail. I think the furthest that I got in this mission were the last 3 enemies before Dutch died, and I never got anywhere close to that again. After about 3 hours of attempts, I finally decided to give up and deem it impossible, because I only got close to the end that one time. It might be possible, but you would need to have all of the luck in the world to do it, and that was just the first part of this mission. Somehow the second part was easier and only took 7 minutes to beat, and the third part was impossible, as there were guys that were on the cliff shooting down at Dutch and Arthur, and I had to just rely on Dutch to kill them, and it took him forever just to kill one of them. And to make it even worse, I couldn't reach a checkpoint, and Dutch died in the same spot on every attempt. The King's Son was a sad one, as the only thing stopping me from beating the mission were 2 sets of guards, because every other part of the mission was doable, where we have to fight our way out of the prison, to running around like a headless chicken before we could get in the canoe, and while escaping the guards, I could just ignore all of them and we would escape to safety. Mrs. Sadie Adler a widow too, Arthur and Sadie get revenge on the O'Driscolls and launch an attack on their camp. It was another impossible mission because just like all of the other missions where there are too many enemies and I could not kill them before Sadie died. My Last Boy is one of, if not my favorite missions in the game. As you probably expected, it is impossible due to the large amount of enemies that are out of range, and everyone's favorite, a forced Deadeye segment. It sucks that such a cool mission is completely impossible. Even getting past the second waves of enemies was too much to handle as well. Our Best Selves is the final train robbery of the game, and I tried, but I could not complete it as Arthur and John have to fight their way through the train, and there's a guy with dual revolvers who just smited me whenever I got near him, and even if I was able to get past him, you were forced to use the Maxim gun, so it would have been impossible anyway. Red Dead Redemption is the final mission of the game, and the longest one in the game. For the first part, you have to cover Sadie from the lighthouse and help her rescue Abigail, who was kidnapped by the Pinkertons, and just like in Goodbye Dear Friend, you were forced to stay in the sniper rifle. When you reach Abigail's location, there's a forced Deadeye moment where you will have to kill the Pinkertons and cannot cancel the Deadeye. While escaping Van Horn with Sadie and Abigail, they will die at the same spot every time. When we get back to the camp, the Pinkertons launch one final attack on the camp, and what is left of the gang has to fight off the Pinkertons and escape. Just like the last Pinkerton raid on the camp, this one is also impossible, and it seems like they do increase damage, and John would not kill them fast enough, and almost all of them were out of the mission range, so I could not even attack most of them. Arthur helps John and stays back to cover him so he can go escape and be with Abigail and Jack, and surprisingly, all I had to do was take cover behind a rock and wait until the final fistfight with Micah. And based on how every other part of this mission went, I thought it would be impossible, but this is actually the only section, well, if you even want to count it a section because it's like 15 seconds, that is doable. We learned that Micah was the true rat and villain, and we sadly have to watch Arthur die, but his sacrifice was worth it as he helped save John and his family. This is not the end of the challenge though, as we still have the epilogue to get through and to try and beat with only my fist. The epilogue starts off with the mission The Wheel, where John Marston, under the alias Jim Milton, is looking for work in Valentine. He is to deliver a package to Pronghorn Ranch, but the wagon gets stolen and John has to get it back. As thanks, the owner of the ranch allows John and his family to live on the ranch if John agrees to help out around the ranch. Since the majority of missions in part 1 of the epilogue are just short missions helping out around the ranch, I am going to quickly storm through them and give short descriptions about the missions. Simple pleasures, you have to milk some cows and clean up manure from the stables. Farming for beginners, you build a fence and help lasso and calm down a bull. Fatherhood for beginners, we have to tire out a horse, help deliver a foal, and take Jack out and teach him how to ride a horse. Old habits, we get into a fist fight with one of the members of the Larmy Gang. Jim Milton rides again, brings back some action as the Larmy Gang attacked Pronghorn Ranch, so John decides to get some revenge and attacks the Larmy Gang's camp. The last part of this mission puts you in a cutscene where John is in his Red Dead 1 cover art pose, and the game tells you to shoot the leader of the Larmy Gang, but if you wait for a few seconds, John will take matter into his own hands and kill the leader himself. So I will count this mission as doable, as I do not have control over John, and I did not use the gun to kill the gang leader. Fatherhood for idiots, John takes Jack into town to buy a few things, but gets attacked and John has to fight off the attackers. Motherhood, John gets a telegram from Sadie and finds out that Abigail and Jack have left, so he goes and does more work around the ranch. The landowning classes, John goes to Blackwater to get a loan so he can buy land at Beecher's Hope and build his own house to show Abigail that he has truly turned his life around. Home of the Gentry, John has to clear a group of squatters out of an abandoned house, and I just gave them some money so they would go away. Every mission in the first part of the epilogue was possible to beat, but the second part is where difficulty will ramp up, but I hope we will have the same success as we just did in part 1. Gainful employment, Sadie has become a bounty hunter and asks John to help hunt down Nathan Kirk. All you have to do is catch him and lasso him off of his horse. Bare knuckle friendships, we find out that Charles is in Saint Denis and fighting people for money. We bet on him, have a run-in with some unfriendly people, kill them, and let Charles slowly drive us away. Home improvements for beginners is the fastest mission in the game, as all we have to do is mash A as we tear down the rundown abandoned house. An honest day labor is the first impossible mission in both parts of the epilogue, ending a streak of 13 possible missions. And it was impossible because there was no cover and there were enemies standing on the cliff that I could not reach, and Sadie kept dying and it seemed like she would not even try to attack them at all. The toolbox was another impossible mission, so we went from 13 possible missions in a row to back-to-back impossible ones, as there were way too many enemies to take out, and even a few that were sitting in trees that were just out of my reach. A New Jerusalem is the house building mission, which is a glorified cutscene. A quick favor for old friends is another impossible mission where we have to help Sadie capture another bounty. It started off easy as we just ride up to his location and capture him, but he gets broken out of prison and we have to fight his gang in Rhodes. And I tried, but I could not get past this as Sadie or John would die pretty quickly, and in the next part it locks us into a sniper rifle, and the final part where we have to recapture him was actually doable, as we only had to fight off a few guards and we take him back to the prison in Rhodes. Uncle's Bad Day, I thought it would be impossible, but somehow on one of the attempts I was able to kill the 2 guards without them alerting anyone. And the second part, where we have to free Uncle, I also thought it would be impossible, but my persistence of just running at the Skinner brothers and hoping it would work out actually did. 15 minutes of attempts later, I was able to complete the mission. Trying again as John takes Jack fishing and saves the family dog Rufus after he was bitten by a snake. A Really Big Bastard is another bounty hunter mission, and this one was possible, just like the mission Exit Pursued by a Bruised Ego, from all the way back in Chapter 2, I believe. John, just like Arthur, gets attacked by a massive bear, and I had to stab him, and Sadie shoots him a few times and scares off the bear. Then we take the bounty back to Blackwater. A new future imagined, John takes Abigail to have their picture taken, to the movies, and out on Flatiron Lake where he proposes. American Venom is the final mission of the game where John, Sadie, and Charles go to Strawberry to find Cleet, and to find out about where Micah has been hiding out. After Cleet reveals Micah's location, Sadie ties up the loose ends and kills Cleet, and they set out to do the same with Micah. But there's a sniper that shoots Charles, and we have to take him out, and the only way to get to the sniper was to run all the way around him, jump down, and kill him. I did have a pretty embarrassing death, where after I killed the sniper, all I had to do was go back to Charles, and I flung myself off the rock and slowly rolled down the hill to my death. However, the next part of the mission I was not able to complete. It might be doable, but I do not think so, due to all of the enemies that are shooting at you and there being pretty much no cover and you having to climb the mountain to get closer to them, which just gives them more time to shoot at you. And when we are climbing the mountain, both Sadie and John were just getting such low health, and it was just one or the other dying pretty much every attempt, and I was just not able to get past this part, so I decided to skip it. For the third part, we are confronted by Joe, and if you forgot he existed, which you probably did, Joe and Cleet were the 2 random guys that Micah brought along on the mission Our Best Selves, which was the last train robbery mission, and like the only mission that they are actually in. I thought that this part was impossible because the same thing kept happening, me running headfirst into Joe and dying, but randomly one attempt, it actually worked, and all I had to do was kill a few more guards and run down to Micah's location, which I popped a few tonics and made it there pretty quickly. It really didn't matter though, as when I reached Micah, it turns out that he just one-shots you and you cannot even leave cover without dying, so I skipped this checkpoint. We get into a 3-minute standoff with Micah and Dutch, and do what should have been done 5 chapters ago and finally kill Micah. Dutch walks away, John takes the gang's money and gets married to Abigail, and perfectly sets up Red Dead Redemption. And I want to thank you so much for watching, and if you have any challenge ideas that you'd like to see for Red Dead 1 or 2, leave a comment down below. Again, thank you all for watching, and have a great day.